Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser, and my screen is frozen. Oh, there I'm back. So, was wondering if I was actually here or in some alternate reality. Looks like I'm here. So, happy Monday morning to all of you. Starting the work week for some, I would guess a number of you are on vacation this week or taking vacation days or whatever it might be as we head into the July 4th week and are kind of at the midpoint of the NFL quiet season, where for this very small period of time, the NFL just hibernates and you actually have general managers and coaches and players taking time off, not at the facilities, not grinding on tape and planning and all that kind of stuff. They're actually vacationing. So we are making our way through until July 17th when rookies report. And today I'm really excited to go through what I think is some fantastic sound and talk about some great sound from an interview that Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks from NFL Network did with Leslie Frazier, who is a new and quiet member of this Seahawks coaching crew, but I think a very critical one. And there is so much good sound. We're going to be together for a little while today because I'm going to play a fair amount of it. And Leslie is, despite the fact he is soft-spoken and we've heard from others that he is very efficient with his words, he was pretty loquacious in this interview. He had a few things to say. He took his time to say it, and all his words were well chosen. But we will spend a little time listening and then reacting to some of those sounds. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Before I do, I absolutely need to congratulate Hawks fan Matt Man, who has been a YouTube member with us maybe from the very beginning. I don't know, very early on. He's been a member now for 3 months. You can join Matt as a YouTube member. The link is in the description of the video, or you should be able to see all sorts of ways that you can join as a YouTube member and really want to join grow the community. Over time, there's going to be a lot of benefits to being a longtime member. I certainly get to know people that have been around for longer and actually get a chance to look for their comments, know the types of things they're interested in. And it's just great. So I really appreciate folks that, like Matt, that have been really loyal members and supported the show. So really appreciate that. Happy 3-month anniversary to you, Matt. Michael Faucet, who is another YouTube member, says, I love the idea of this show. Haven't heard much about Leslie lately. Love to hear your thoughts some point on how long you believe the Seahawks will keep him around. Yeah, this is going to be something we'll have to monitor. I think that Leslie Frazier's going to be here. I don't see any reason why he's going to be here just on a short term. He's not a consultant. He is part of the coaching staff. And as you'll hear some of the sound from this interview, he is like very excited about the opportunity that he's got in front of him to really have an impact here in Seattle in all sorts of different ways, not always in the ways that you might expect. So I'm going to go ahead and play some sound, and I will give the normal caveats and the normal plug, which is there's a limit to what I can do to pump up the sound on the share that I'm going to do, but I will do my best. If you want the best quality sound, the best way to do that is to be a Patreon member. Patreon.com/hawkblogger gets you access to all of the audio versions of this podcast where I sweeten the audio, equalize the audio, and there's no ads. So patreon.com/hawkblogger is the best way to get the best quality audio, and you get access to the Slack channel, which, by the way, met some folks in real life, IRL, last night. Went to the Everett Aqua Sox baseball game with a couple folks that are Patreon members who are also Mariners fans. So we got to watch Lazaro Montes, one of the Mariners' new prospects, play up there in Everett. It was great. It was a lot of fun. And shout out to Zach and Braxton for joining. That was fun to meet both of them. You can join over at patreon.com/hawkblogger. It's genuinely a really cool community of good people, and I highly recommend it. So we've got a really cool thing going. If you haven't already, like and subscribe, all that stuff as well. But with that, let me go ahead and get ready to start sharing some sound. Good morning to Joey Walker, by the way. Appreciate having you here as well. So what we're gonna talk, let me see, there we go. Got to make sure I got the right one. Let me first add it to the stage, and then we will hear it together. First point of conversation here with Bucky Brooks and Daniel Jeremiah interviewing Leslie Frazier is about what he was looking forward to in kind of getting back on the field in the coaching room, and what he's looking for in Seattle. And so this is Leslie Frazier talking about one of the things that was interesting is the parts of the team that he is eager to work with. Here's Leslie Frazier.
Putting your feet back in the grass.
It's been really good. We got some talented players there in Seattle. There's some guys in the secondary. There's some guys up front. The beauty about what I'm doing in Seattle, which is one of the things that was really attractive, I have a chance, Daniel and Bucky, to be involved with the entire team. So I'm working with our offense, with our special teams, and obviously with our defense as well, and then being able to assist Mike and try to help him be the best. Mike McDonald be the best head coach he can possibly be. So it's just been a blessing, man. It's been so good all the way around, just to have your hand in everything. So it's been really good.
I think it's cool to hear that from Leslie Frazier. I honestly hadn't been thinking as much about his influence on other parts of the team, but it's also pretty cool to hear how excited he is to not just be limited to defense, but to actually work with special teams. You've got Jay Harbaugh, who's new coach to the NFL, coming in running special teams. He's going to benefit from having Leslie Frazier and his experience in the NFL to tap into. Ryan Grubb, who is new to the NFL and is, as much as he's my age, he's in his late 40s, but there's still stuff to learn, and Leslie Frazier is there to help Ryan Grubb as well. So it's really cool to me, because I guess before I had heard this interview, I honestly kind of conceived of Leslie Frazier as being a consigliere to Mike McDonald, and basically this advisor for a first-time head coach. And if anything else, maybe he would lean in on the defense, right? Aden Dirty is his first time as a DC, but he's got Mike McDonald, so I figure Mike McDonald knows what he's doing there and can help. But it really sounds like part of what was exciting for Leslie Frazier was to be involved with all parts of the team. And if you're not familiar with Leslie Frazier's career, I mean, it's worth kind of going through it. He has a long career, so I'm not going to go through every stop he's had. But, he was a Bears player from 81 to 85 in the secondary, and a very good one at that. But then he went on to be a head coach at a small university in Trinity, but largely has spent a lot of his career coaching defensive backs, which is what he was. He's been a defensive coordinator multiple times. He was and his first real chance as a head coach in the NFL came in 2010 when he was an interim head coach for the Minnesota Vikings after being a defensive coordinator with them since 2007. So he's there for, a few years as the DC, then got elevated, got a chance as interim, and then stuck around as head coach from 2011 to 2013. That was his chance as a head coach. And if you're curious how the Minnesota Vikings did during that time, let's take a look. Honestly, I've forgotten. So I'm curious myself. If we go back and we look at Minnesota Vikings 2011 to 2013. So they were 3-13 his first year, 10-6 his second year, and they were second in the division. They made the playoffs, but they lost in the wild card round. And then they were 5-10 the following year. So 2 pretty poor seasons and 1 pretty decent one. He did have Adrian Peterson, but his quarterbacks were Christian Ponder, and then in his final year, Matt Castle. So he did not have the quarterback. It was unfortunate for him that the next year they drafted Teddy Bridgewater, and before injury, Teddy Bridgewater was a very good quarterback, and Mike Zimmer benefited from having him as well. But, you know, if I look at the defensive rankings for the Vikings, you know, they had some pretty good defensive players during Leslie Frazier's tenure as defensive coordinator. They finished as high as 6th in yards allowed, top 10 in points allowed a few different times. So he had a pretty good run there. But then more recently, he's been a defensive coordinator at Tampa Bay. He was a secondary coach for the Ravens in 2016. That's where he met up with, I think, Mike McDonald, who was not a DC at that time, but I think was an intern or doing some of the early stuff in his career. Maybe he's a linebackers coach back then. I'm talking about Mike McDonald. But in any event, that's where they got a crossover. But then he was the defensive coordinator with the Bills from 2017 to 2022. And if we look at the Bills during that time, their defense, 2017, not great, 26th ranked defense in yards allowed, 18th in points. But in his second season, they became the second ranked defense in yards allowed. Then the next season, they were third ranked defense in yards allowed, second in points allowed. Then they dropped down in 2020 to 14th in yards and 16th in points. In 2021, they were the number 1 ranked defense in points and yards. 2022, the second ranked defense in points, 6th in yards. So he has overseen a very successful defense in Buffalo. And then the last season, I think he spent with the NFL Network and did not work for any team. So just to give you some idea of his kind of path through his career and all the different things he has seen, all the different coaches he has worked with, all the different players. Some of that will come up in these interviews. And for the people that like this show when it's short, this is not going to be the show you love. This show is probably going to go longer than an hour because I got a lot of sound and we're going to talk about it. For people that like the longer shows and need more things to distract them, you will like this show just fine. I want to welcome a new member, Peter Jakobsen. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Great to get a new YouTube member. Always happy to add to the family. And Peter says, Frazier is such a great hire and pretty cool that his journey has come all the way around back to Seattle all these years later. Skip trying the last name. Well, we'll see if I got it. And from Noah Berman, another YouTube member says, love the longer shows. Thank you so much, Brian. If you're not someone who reads the comments, which generally you shouldn't, but I do because it's part of what I'm trying to do in building the community here and listening to people. There's an all-out war going on about whether these shows should be half an hour or an hour or longer. And so I would say most people want them to be longer, but there's a pretty vocal group that likes the shorter stuff. So can't please everybody all the time. All right. Let's keep going. So that was Leslie Frazier talking about working with all parts of the team. This next piece is him talking about this kind of necessity of having somebody that's a little bit more experienced in the room. And you know, it was a good question from Bucky Brooks about this. And actually, this was Daniel Jeremiah that asked this question, kind of asking like, what does it take to be this kind of person in the room?
No, that's a great question, Daniel. I did an interview with the Miami Dolphins many, many years ago, and Bill Parcels, he was the president at the time. And he told me, he said, Leslie, one day you're going to be a head coach in this league. And he said, I'm going to give you some advice. He said, when I got my job with the Giants, I think that was his first head coaching job, he hired his former head coach on his staff to kind of like help him to segue from being, you know, a defensive coordinator and becoming a head coach. And he gave me that advice, Daniel. I didn't follow that advice. I wish I had, because it's a big difference going from, say, offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator to head coach. I mean, the duties are immense, and they've grown over the years. I mean, you're really a CEO today as opposed to really get into the nuts and bolts of what has to happen on offense and defense. But I applaud Mike and John Snyder for having the foresight to say, hey, you know what? We need someone with experience to help us along the way. And so if I could turn back the clock, that's something I would definitely do.
That was Leslie Frazier talking about the fact that Bill Parcells gave him advice when he was interviewing for the Dolphins job a while ago, that when he eventually gets to be a head coach, that he should hire someone of experience that's been a head coach to be on his staff. And I didn't know this, but he says that Bill Parcells hired his former head coach to be on his staff in New York, and it was a big deal. Leslie did not do that when he got the job in Minnesota, and he regrets it. And you heard him calling out Mike McDonald and John Schneider for being having the foresight to talk about the need, like to basically be humble enough, to be wise enough to say, yeah, look, we've got a new head coach. He's the youngest head coach in the NFL. We have a new offensive coordinator who's never been in the NFL. We've got a new defensive coordinator who's never been in DC. We've got a new special teams coach who's never done that in the NFL. None of these guys have worked together as a whole group before. Maybe it would make some sense to have somebody who's actually been down these paths before available to all of those guys throughout this journey. We might look back, everybody, as this period of time, and when hopefully this team has ascended to where we hope they will return to, and say the key hire was not just Mike McDonald or Ryan Grubb. It was Leslie Frazier. And I think it would not surprise me at all if in 3-5 years, part of the story that gets told is how key Leslie Frazier was in those moments behind the scenes to pull these coaches together, to say the right thing to a player, not as the head coach, not as their coordinator, but as someone who can talk to them kind of in the shadows. Leslie Frazier's role here could be key. And compare this again. Like I've made a lot of points about, as much as I love Pete Carroll, how frustrated I was with his inability to hire excellent coordinators, excellent assistant coaches. And we talk about Tater. Carl Smith was the Leslie Frazier for Pete Carroll. He was his confidant. He was his guy that he would talk to. Is there a bigger upgrade in the NFL than going from Carl Tater Smith to Leslie Frazier as the assistant head coach? Kind of real. Now, Tater didn't have assistant head coach title, but the point being is Leslie Frazier is going to be that guy that really is whispering in the ears. And I think that that's just a huge, huge upgrade versus who they had doing that kind of thing in past years. Now, of course, Pete Carroll didn't really need somebody to do that because he had all the experience. So he was the oldest coach. And so it's a little bit of a different situation. but I do still think that that's a huge upgrade in that particular piece of the team. Next piece that I wanted to talk about here was they were asking Leslie, this is Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks, asking Leslie Frazier about what does it take to be to succeed as one of these coaches that's not a defensive coordinator, not an offensive coordinator, not the head coach. How do you kind of thrive in a role that doesn't maybe get as much fanfare? And it was interesting hearing Leslie's thoughts on that.
I think it's so important, Bucky, to be a selfless individual. You have to really take the approach that I'm going to be a servant in this role, and you got to be egoless. You can't get caught up in my name not being out in front. When you're the coordinator, your name is on that offense or defense or special teams. It's all about you and your group. Was a little bit different in this role. You're probably not going to be doing a lot of press conferences, post-game, pre-game. I mean, that's not going to be you. So you have to be a person that is okay with not getting the credit, but understanding your role, and your role being to help the team succeed without a lot of fanfare. If you can be that person and have that type of humility, I think you have a chance to succeed in this role. Just being able to understand the position you're in and what your purpose is, and be okay with that.
There's a lot that I love about that part of the interview and the answer from Leslie Frazier. I think that the thing that stood out to me, being a former, software senior exec, whatever you call it, I've always been attracted to the notion of servant leadership. And you heard Leslie Frazier use the phrase servant. I've heard that from Mike McDonald as well. It's clear that they're aware of the concept of servant leadership. And if you're not familiar, I'm not going to go into depth on it, but the general idea is there's people that lead with the belief that the people that work for them and work to achieve their interests and their ideas and their needs, that they're there to meet the leader's needs. Servant leadership flips that upside down and basically is the concept that a great leader is actually there to serve the people that work for them and to enable them, and that leadership isn't really ever one person doing something. It is figuring out a way to get larger and larger groups of people to work together and to coordinate together. And some of that's about individual success, but a lot of it's about what it means to succeed as a group. And the leader's job is to kind of figure out what the group needs in order to reach that kind of success. And so I think it's great to know that Leslie Frazier has that. He talks a lot about humility. You're going to hear other parts of this interview where he goes into a little bit more detail about what he's trying to impart to other people on the team, including the players, including the coaches, in order to get them to buy into having this kind of selfless approach. And I think, he kind of sold me. I was already sold on Leslie Frazier, but as he goes through this interview, you just hear why so many people have respect for him. And, I really gained respect listening. This is fantastic. A lot of credit to Bucky Brooks and Daniel Jeremiah. They asked great questions and gave Leslie the chance to take his time with some really great answers. All right, let's go on to the next piece here. Next piece was getting to exactly what I just said. This idea of how do you take that mindset, this kind of servant mindset, this team mindset, and how do you get that to where it's actually something the team buys into? And you're going to hear Leslie Frazier here talk about I'm kind of cutting in the middle, but he's talking about how coordinator, like position coaches want to be coordinators and coordinators want to be head coaches. And then he transitions to talking about players and getting them into buying into this team mindset. So here's Leslie Frazier on that.
And then one of the things when Mike did have me to talk to our team, I talked to our guys about understanding what their roles are and how everyone benefits when we succeed as a team. But it's hard to get that across, man, because guys want that next contract.
Mm-hmm.
Or if a guy is been in the league for any period of time, then he wants to be able to go out with a blaze of glory. And so how do I get the players to buy into? And this is a conversation Mike and I've had many times. How do I get the players to buy into team? Mm-hmm. What's the best thing for our team? And that may mean if I'm a wide receiver, if I'm DK Metcalf, I might not have 10 catches for 200 in this ball game, but we won. Mm-hmm. One of the Kenny Walker, who's an outstanding running back with the Seahawks and has done a terrific job in his career. I said there may come a time where Kenny may end up with 6 carries for 30 yards, mm-hmm. but the Seahawks won the game. Can Kenny be good with that? Can he be okay with that and say, you know what, we won, man, and if we win, we're all going to benefit. And as you said, Daniel, it's harder to get that. I mean, there's so much talent in the league. That's the intangible sometimes that gets you over the top. Guys understanding, I just got to do my job and fulfill my role. And if we all do that, we have a chance to do something special.
So you hear a little bit of the gaps in his talking. That's because his internet was glitching a little bit, lagging. But I mean, there's some interesting aspects to what Leslie Frazier said there. I think one of them is that his first person he mentioned is DK Metcalf. Is that by chance? I don't know if it is, right? Like, I don't know that that's a shot at DK Metcalf or saying that DK Metcalf needs to do anything differently. It could just as easily be DK Metcalf is the most talented player. And so he's calling out a guy that, if he can get DK Metcalf to buy in, then everyone else should buy in. But I also thought it was interesting. He talked about Ken Walker. He talked about that when he spoke to the team. So this was Leslie Frazier speaking to the team that he gave the example. He focused on Kenneth Walker. I don't think Kenneth Walker is going to have trouble. Kenneth Walker has never struck me as a me guy. He's always struck me as a team guy all the way back to his college years. And it wouldn't surprise me if the reason Leslie Frazier picked him is because, hey, here's the lead running back. I know Kenneth Walker is going to buy into that. So let's use him as an example to get other guys to buy in. I don't know if DK Metcalf is the guy that you want to use, that you want to, hold up there as the example. Maybe you do. I don't know. But I think there's more evidence to give you some concern than others. I do want to get the pronunciation correct for our new member, Peter Jacobson. So I said Jakobsen. The spelling really sounded like the Nordic pronunciation would make sense, but I will go with Jacobsen. That's the one. All right. So next bit here from the other thing I wanted to say about that bit from Leslie Frazier was how important he thinks this is to actually getting a great team. And there's going to be a little bit more sound on this in a bit, but just getting players to buy into that, he thinks is basically everybody's got a talented team, but it's the teams that actually play together, that play in a selfless way, that are focused on what's needed to get the right outcome as opposed to their own personal gain, that have this intangible advantage over other teams. And, I love that as a focus. It's not an easy thing to do. I absolutely agree that the great teams have that in them. The whole point of this interview was to talk about this notion of connectedness in the secondary. And Daniel Jeremiah, Bucky Brooks had some great thoughts on some of this and talking about, that there's a lot of talk about offensive linemen and how the 5 of them need to play together and that they're a unit and all this kind of stuff. But there's not the same conversation about the secondary. And they talked about the back 5, meaning the 2 safeties and the 3 corners. And it was a good call out and a good topic in general. And so that's the primary thing they wanted to ask Leslie Frazier about relative to his experience. And he's going to talk here about why these guys need to be connected. And he's going to talk about his experience with some of the Bills secondaries. And I think we'll talk about that more in a second. Here's Leslie on connectedness with the 5 guys in the secondary.
Well, when you guys are using the analogy about basketball, I thought that was the perfect analogy, man, because it is in a lot of ways like basketball. In the secondary, you're all connected. And it may not seem that way when you're playing corner, another guy's playing safety, or another guy playing the nickelback position. But we all have to be on the same page in order for our defense to really excel, much like in basketball when you're running a play, just the NBA Finals, which I'm a big fan of the NBA. Just a few weeks ago when Jason Tatum and, say, Jaylen Brown, when they were in sync versus when, say, Luka Doncic or Kyrie were out of sync, it affects the rest of the 5 that are on the court on your particular side of the ball. And it's no different in the secondary. If Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, when we were in Buffalo, were not in sync in our secondary, it didn't matter what Tre'Davious White did. He was going to be affected because our safeties weren't on the same page with our corners or with the Taron Johnson at nickelback. So that symmetry in the secondary is extremely important, and that cohesiveness that's necessary to have a good unit. It's imperative in the backfield. You don't want to just have a good player. You need a unit to have in order to have a good secondary, and they got to be playing as one. And so the communication part of it, the technique part of it, those guys being able to spend time with one another away from the field as well as what they do on the field, just developing that brotherhood that you need to have a strong secondary.
Leslie Frazier talking there about how important it is to have this camaraderie among the secondary group and the way they need to function as one. And anyone that's played basketball or understands zone defense, the amount of both verbal and nonverbal communication to understand, okay, the we're getting morphed into this, the players over here offensively, so we need to trade off here. You talk about on offensive line where there's these pass offs when there's a twist and there's a defensive end that's coming around the back side of the defensive tackle, and how the guard has to be able to pass off one player to his tackle and he picks up the guy who's looping around. You talk about those things quite often, but a lot of that's happening in the secondary. You want to see a trips on one side with 3 receivers and the stack or the stack of receivers that they do, and how the defensive backs need to communicate and hand those guys off. It's the same. It's not the exact same situation, but it's the same concept. And so really interesting to hear Leslie Frazier talk about that. Also, if you've listened to my Jarek Reed interview, the Trey Brown interview I did, you hear how much that cornerback room has really been trying to turn back to each other. Like, they are close knit. They're doing things off the field. They're bowling. They're competitive, but they're like, they like each other. And I think that that's an indication of what, I think the players are already moving toward. But then you're going to have the coaches at just the right time, I think, in their development as a young cornerback group and a young secondary come to kind of bring them together. So cool stuff there from Leslie Frazier on that. He goes on to talk about how important actually liking the guys are. He has a lot of comments I'm not going to share, else I'd just be playing the whole interview. But this next bit is just about, in his experience, the great secondaries that he's played with or coached have really liked each other.
About what allows you to have a great unit. Yeah, I think there needs to be some likability there. There needs to be someone who doesn't have a big ego and doesn't feel like, I've got to get all the attention.
I think that's a pretty big acknowledgement, and something that you look at this Seahawks secondary, how young it's been. Tariq Woolen comes in, almost wins Rookie of the Year, leads rookies in interceptions at corner. I think he was tied for the league lead in interceptions as a rookie, made the Pro Bowl. Devin Witherspoon comes in his rookie year. He makes the Pro Bowl, in there for Rookie of the Year voting. You've got a lot of kind of individuals there, and that have kind of seen their star rise. How much do they feel they're, the guy versus they're part of a great group? And I think that's part of what Leslie Frazier is speaking to. He then goes on and talks about a name that has gotten quite a bit of conversation from coaches this offseason, and a guy that was maybe a surprise to some people in the in the NFL last year in terms of making a Pro Bowl. But listen to what Leslie Frazier has to say about one of your safeties.
About what we need to do well. Julian Love, who is an outstanding defensive back, who I think over time you guys will be talking about him a lot.
Yeah.
Tariq, one of our corners, young corners, who has a bright future. One of the things that we're trying to instill in those guys is a love for each other and a respect for each other's games. Because when you have that love and respect for one another, it has a chance to take your game to a whole nother level. And that's what I've seen with really good secondaries. Those guys, they don't get concerned that someone else got 2 interceptions. They didn't get any of that game. It becomes a competition. You got 2 that game. Well, I'm getting 2 the next game. And they just feed off of each other with that same positive energy. And that's what you want when you're trying to develop a really strong secondary where they all feed off of each other.
Love that from Leslie Frazier. And we're going to take a second here to read between some lines. We're going to make some guesses. You guys do the same thing. You tell me what you think he was saying there. But one, interesting that first player he calls out Julian Love. And he also says, this is a guy you're going to be talking about a lot more. The coaching staff is pretty darn high on Julian Love. They've talked about his communication, but they've talked about him. They've talked about him a lot. I think he's going to be a key part of the leadership team. I think he is becoming a core part of this new group. And so that's cool. There's nothing to not like about that. Then he talks about Tariq Woolen, who he talks about quite a bit in this interview. Well, there's more sound I'm going to have for you about Tariq Woolen, but he talks about the two of them and that they're working on having love and respect for each other's games. So does that imply that they don't have that? Is that a fair thing to maybe read between the lines here, that maybe Julian Love and Tariq Woolen as two individuals in that secondary were not super tight last year? Maybe. And let's go a little further. Let's read between the lines even one layer deeper. Tariq Woolen is not known for being a student of the game. Tariq Woolen is not known for being into all the details of the position. Tariq Woolen is known for being an elite athlete that can do things at a size and length that nobody else has pretty much ever done. And to be just a natural at the position, he's new to playing cornerback still. He changed from wide receiver only a few years ago, and he's had pretty immediate success doing so. He's also, very talkative. He likes the limelight a little bit. He admits that. He likes talking, all these kinds of things. Julian Love is quiet, studious. He is a good athlete. He is not someone that, blew people away in the combine with his athletic profile. But he is smart. He communicates. He studies. He's in the right place at the right time. He's a pro. And it wouldn't shock me if somebody who puts all that time and has to work for it as much as Julian Love has had to work for it, maybe doesn't appreciate and doesn't respect, or had a little bit less respect for a guy that made some really key mistakes during the season last year in zone coverage, especially. Tariq Woolen, I told you I had Cody Alexander, Coach Cody, on the show a couple times. He said Tariq Woolen was his second highest graded man cover corner in the NFL last year after Sauce Gardner. PFF came out, I think, last week and had Tariq Woolen as the number 1 graded man cover corner in the NFL last year. This is during what most people consider a down year. But if you talk about zone coverage, Tariq had some real issues. Blown coverages against the 49ers, a couple other places where he just wasn't where he was supposed to be. And that comes down to details. That comes down to professionalism. And I think that comes down to something that I can imagine Julian Love getting pretty frustrated about, where maybe he was having to cover, or some other safety was having to cover for mistakes that Tariq Woolen was making. So maybe that, I don't know that there's any animosity. Maybe there was. But interesting that at least there's a possibility, based on the phrasing of Leslie Frazier, that there maybe was a little tension there, or a little lack of respect. If not that, then the other interpretation would be, look, Tariq Woolen's got this unlimited physical potential. He needs to learn how to be a pro. Who is the best pro in that room? Julian Love. We're going to connect those two. Whether or not they had any issues or not, we want these two to come together, because Julian Love has a lot to offer Tariq Woolen. And so I just thought that was pretty interesting to hear him talking about this need for likability, the fact that they're trying to build this camaraderie in the room, and then bringing up Julian Love and Tariq Woolen as the first examples. This next sound kind of goes into, I think, a key concept that we'll probably hear a lot more about as the season progresses. But Bucky Brooks had set this up really well. I'm not going to play all Bucky's sound, but basically said, look, you were known for giving your players freedom on defense, and that Tre'Davious White would say, like, Leslie would let me know if I saw the receiver was in a certain split and I knew that his tendency out of that was to do this, but the defensive call said something else, that I could do what I thought was right. And I could trust that Jordan Poyer or whoever behind me was going to have my back in case I was wrong. And Bucky was asking him, well, where did that come from? Where did this philosophy come from of giving freedom to your players? And here's Leslie talking about that.
Yeah. That's a great point, Bucky. I'm gonna tell you where that mindset that those players who played for me, whether it's Troy Vincent back in my days back in Philadelphia, or Bobby Taylor, or Al Harris, who's now coaching the secondary in Dallas, that ability to be able to let those players be themselves, that comes from Buddy Ryan, who was my defensive coordinator when I was in Chicago, long time. NFL coach, one of the greatest defensive coordinators in our league's history. I can remember a game, we were getting ready to play the Raiders, and they were in Oakland at the time. And Cliff Branch, if you guys remember him, great receiver, whole thing. So Buddy is telling me, okay, you're going to have to lock up Cliff throughout this ball game. Now, I want you Cliff Branch on tape. This guy's good. He's fast. He's quick. He wasn't a big guy, but he was so elusive, man. And so I came to Buddy as the week went on, and I said, because we were a big man-to-man team with pressure, and we got out the quarterbacks because of the blitz package we had. So I went to Buddy and I said, Buddy, I don't want to be up there pressing Cliff Branch the whole game. I think sometimes I need to back off a little bit and be able to mix it up. And he turned to me, he said, Leslie, whatever you got to do to get it done, just get it done. I'm good with it. Make sure it works. If you go back home, make sure it works. But I'll never forget that, man. And it helped me to be a better player because my coach, he wasn't so stuck on just what he believed in his strategy. And he considered how I felt. I'm the guy out there, playing. I'm the guy that got to cover Cliff Branch. And that helped me throughout my career. And then once I became a coach, I always remembered how Buddy treated me and Mike Singletary and all the great players that we had. People talk about that 46 defense that we were part of, but what made that 46 was Buddy being willing to listen to us. And when we came up with suggestions about the game plan and saying, hey, Buddy, maybe we should think about this on 1st and 10, or in my case, hey, I like to be able to not press every down. But to have a coach who empowers you in that way, and when players get that, I found that those guys are really run through a wall for you because they know you trust them and you respect what they have to say. So I've always
terrific sound there from Leslie Frazier, and great story about how he worked with Buddy Ryan back in that famous 85 Bears defense, and 46 was the scheme for people that don't, the bear front that they used to run. And interesting, like, I don't know that I wouldn't have necessarily assumed Buddy Ryan was the kind of DC that would listen to his players. He seemed like a old school gruff defensive coordinator who's like, by the book, do what I say. And it turns out that's not the case. I mean, almost the opposite in terms of what Leslie Frazier is saying here, how important it is that they were able to have input with Buddy about the game plan week in, week out. It's a pretty big acknowledgement. And also, I don't know about you all, but I think about Mike McDonald. Mike McDonald, I mean, I'm a big fan. He does not strike me as the guy that necessarily wants a lot of variability in how things are done. I think he seems like a guy that puts a lot of effort into scheming, planning, dissecting, and wants things done a certain way. I could be totally wrong about that, but that's his personality kind of leans me in that direction, which even makes Leslie Frazier's presence all the more valuable because it gives Mike McDonald a little bit of a ballast here of, well, wait a second, like, there's a way here to really give players some freedom to get things done. We have heard from the defensive line that I think it was Leonard Williams who said, hey, Mike McDonald, like they're letting us get our jobs done in the way that we do it, because the way that Leonard Williams, might accomplish what my responsibility is on this given play is potentially different than the way Jaron Reed might do it or Byron Murphy might do it. But if the goal is clear and the understanding is clear, if you give us freedom of how we get it done, we can be that much better. And so I thought that was really fascinating. And you heard him talk about players over his career that he's been able to do this for, and how much that has then in turn created a loyalty and an effort and a buy-in that is super valuable, that every coach is looking for. So great story there from Leslie Frazier on that. This next piece is going to sound a little confusing because I think Daniel Jeremiah asks him here about, do you build in this day and age, do you try to build a defense from back to front or front to back? And I see Hawks fan Matt Man asking if McDonald is known for giving his defensive players this kind of autonomy. I think we're learning. I think all his players speak glowingly about him. And I think that there's a lot of conversation about him accentuating the attributes of his players. I haven't heard as much about how much freedom they've provided, but that sound I've got from Leonard Williams is probably the closest I have to that. Anyway, so this next bit is about, Daniel Jeremiah asking, you want to build a defense front to back, meaning defensive line first is the front, to back meaning the secondary, or do you prioritize the secondary and then coverage and then worry about, the front line? So you're going to hear Leslie Frazier answer, and he is going to, for the longest part of this answer, say the priority should be back to front, but he meant to say front to back. All his answer is about the front. So if you try not to be confused at the beginning, every time he says back, he means front. He eventually corrects himself at the end, but listen to Leslie Frazier talk about priorities, because I think this has some implications for the Seahawks.
Yeah, that's another good one, man. You guys had some good questions. This is one I've thought about a lot. When you're trying to construct a team, in particular on defense, and I would have to say it's got to be back to front. You got to find ways to get after these quarterbacks. And this goes back to my playing days as well.
Mm-hmm.
We had some good players on the back end, but our front was nasty. We got a Hall of Famer and Richard Dent, who's in the Hall of Fame now. Dan Hampton is in the Hall of Fame. Steve McMichael is about to go into the Hall of Fame. And in my career and it is a passing league, as we all know in this call. And so you got to find ways to disrupt the passes. As great as Dion was as a defensive back, without that pass rush, those receivers are going to get open. The rules are so liberal now. Mm-hmm. It's not like when the Mel Blount rule was put in, where you could just jam them up all down the field and keep them off their spots. And you got to give them some room. So they're going to catch some balls. Well, how can we disrupt the timing of that quarterback? And what I found is the greatest mismatches are usually the matchups between offensive tackles, these fast defensive ends, these guards that are okay guards against some tremendous athletes that are playing defensive tackle. And that's where your greatest mismatches are. So I have to say, from back to front, if we can get our front right, front to back. If we can get our front right, we have a chance to be successful on defense.
Okay, at the very end, he gets it right. But you just heard him that whole time talking about how, even though Leslie Frazier is a secondary player, a secondary coach primarily, but has coached defense for many years across many different eras, for him, the priority is the front. And he talked about Richard Dent and Steve McMichael and Dan Hampton and all the guys they had on the Bears and other places. And then you think about what the Seahawks did in the draft. And I'm going to play some sound a little bit later about Daniel Jeremiah kind of reflecting on this. But, that is music to my ears, because God dang, the front has not been the clear priority on this team for a long time. And edge rushers, sure, but they didn't do well with them. But it's very clear. I've told you from my very beginning, in terms of exploring and analyzing Mike McDonald, I think defensive tackle is going to be a maybe the biggest difference between Mike McDonald's positional priorities to Pete Carroll is going to be defensive tackle. And what did they do in the first round of the draft? Drafted a defensive tackle, which they've never done before in all the years that John Schneider's been here. In fact, the Seahawks hadn't drafted a defensive tackle as high as they drafted Byron Murphy since 1994 when they drafted Sam Adams. So it is a huge, I think, a massive tectonic shift in prioritization and how important the defensive line is going to be for the Seahawks under Mike McDonald. And that makes my heart happy. We need it. We need it. And I think we've got it. So it's going to be fun to watch that kind of come together. This next bit is Leslie. This is the last sound I'm going to play from Leslie. And then I've got a couple other sound bites from Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks I wanted to play because they react after Leslie leaves to some of what he said. And I thought there's some interesting pieces in there. This last bit is him talking about this notion of a shutdown corner and what do you do when you're building a defense with a shutdown corner? Here's Leslie Frazier talking about it. And interesting who he brings up when this question's asked.
Any problems, Bucky, when you have a guy who has that type of ability, if he has the ability to match up with receivers, everybody else kind of plays around him and you kind of build a defense in that way, which is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. You have a guy who can, and we would do it with Tre'Davious, and I think hopefully we'll be able to do it with Tariq. I think we will be in Seattle. And there are other good corners who will allow this as well. But when you have a guy who can lock down that team's number one receiver and travel with him, it just gives you so many variables from a defensive play caller standpoint. You almost feel like we've erased that player, and now we're making you play left-handed on offense. So you got to go to your alternative on offense, and that usually works in our favor because we can protect that lesser corner who may not be as good as our shutdown corner, which makes our defense stronger. The second part of it, I don't.
So Leslie Frazier there talking about the value of having a shutdown corner, but I think the most important part of that sound is if I asked the most rabid Seahawks fans, who is the Seahawks shutdown corner? If I asked 100 of them, who is the Seahawks shutdown corner? I think 80 of them would say Devin Witherspoon. Maybe more, maybe less, but I think a significant majority would say Devin Witherspoon is not only the shutdown corner, but the best corner on the team. I've got sound from Jake Bobo that I can pull up at some point, probably not today, but Jake Bobo getting interviewed. And when he's asked, like, who's the toughest for you to go up against? He doesn't say Tariq Woolen. He says Devin Witherspoon. And he goes into some detail about why it's so hard to go up against Devin Witherspoon. And not only does Leslie Frazier talk about Tariq Woolen as their shutdown corner and the guy that they hope can be their Tre'Davious White and a guy that can travel, which, by the way, is not something that the Seahawks did generally. They did not have their corners travel and follow or shadow the best player, the best receiver on the opposing team. But he picks out Tariq Woolen. And that was eye-opening. He didn't mention Devin Witherspoon in the entire interview. I don't think it's because he doesn't think Devin Witherspoon's good. I don't think that's at all the case. But he basically, the guys he mentioned were Julian Love and Tariq Woolen. And he mentioned Tariq Woolen the most. And so I think they really feel like they've got something there in Tariq. And I think they feel like maybe either the way he's been used has not been ideal, or the way he's approached his job has not been ideal, or whatever, but that they think that they've got what they need there. I'll be really curious to see if that's something that, if I think about Tariq Woolen as a guy who is built to play outside. So if he's really going to travel, there's times that, CeeDee Lamb plays most of the time in the slot. Does that mean that in those situations, Tariq Woolen is going to be the nickel corner, like the slot corner, and that Devin Witherspoon is going to be outside? I mean, I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see how this translates to their plan for Tariq Woolen. But, anybody that's thinking that, hey, Tariq Woolen is not core to what they're doing is just wrong. Like that, I admit that heading into the draft, I was the one that brought up, is Tariq Woolen really a good fit for what they want to do here? Is he a guy who is not known for his physical toughness, who's not known for being great in supporting the run? Are they going to feel like, hey, maybe we want to go with more physical corners, and that they would maybe move on from Tariq and get some high draft compensation in return? Not only did they not do that, but they see him clearly as very central to what they're trying to build here. So I thought that was cool to hear, and definitely appreciated a lot of that. The next bit that I wanted to play was some of the reactions from Daniel Jeremiah. I got a couple here from Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks, reacting to what they heard from Leslie Frazier. And this first one is about what they think they heard from Leslie Frazier about mismatches.
About he didn't say it specifically like this, but you could tell it in his voice when he talked about guards, like the best matchup on the field.
Tomato cans.
The tomato can. We've always said almost every team, if you go through all 32, there are very few teams that are rock solid with those three interior linemen. Very few. So what's the trump card? Well, we've seen it. Look at the contracts that Christian Wilkins and Simmons and all these guys have got, and Quinnen Williams, Chris Jones. Man, if you got somebody that can just annihilate those guys, man, what a benefit. And I thought, okay, well, he's on Seattle. Who did Seattle take in the first round this year? Look, Byron Murphy.
Yeah.
Byron Murphy, to be that guy, to give you that matchup advantage to win. And not only is it a good matchup in terms of the talent disparity between that guard and that defensive tackle in terms of athleticism, it's also the shortest route to the quarterbacks. You're going to be the most disruptive, and you can't, there's not as many things you can do to take those guys away as you could with, being on the edge, knowing where you're going to be, and I can send tight ends and backs over there.
This is what I'm talking about. I mean, if you've listened to me for years, I've basically said the same thing for 10 years, 15 years, whatever it's been. The impact of a effective interior pass rusher cannot be overstated. It is the fastest, straightest path to the quarterback. It is the least able to be game planned for. You can double team, you can triple team, but it's very different to commit two offensive linemen to a player than it is to have a running back or a tight end chip an edge rusher on their way out to a pattern. And it has a much different impact on the overall play and how you do things. But if you're committing multiple offensive linemen to a player, somebody else is going to get open. Someone else is going to have an easier matchup. You're going to be able to elevate other players. You're going to be able to, if you decide to bring extra rushers, you're going to have a free rusher somewhere. That's just the math of it for most cases. And so that is why it is such a trump card to be able to have a great interior pass rusher, and why I believe Byron Murphy is going to be one of those guys. And I think Leonard Williams is one of those guys. And by the way, Jaron Reed is not like an elite one, but he did pretty darn well rushing from zero tech last year. So I think, and that's not even including Draymond Jones, who is going to get time on the interior as a pass rusher as well, even though he's working primarily as an edge rusher and training to be an outside linebacker. He's going to get time inside. He definitely will. So I think the Seahawks are set up to rush from the inside better than they've been definitely since Michael Bennett was here. since they had Michael Bennett and Brandon Mebane, who was not a great pass rusher, but definitely was a guy that commanded a lot of attention. Tony McDaniel, like they had some guys that created trouble on the inside. I think this group has every chance to be better than that group did. And so loved hearing that. I also think this notion of how much, the Seahawks, we talk about the offensive line a lot and the trouble with the Seahawks offensive line. Well, they aren't alone. We went through the NFC West. The line talent in the NFC West is not good, and it is particularly weak on the interior. And so now you're talking about, think about some of the guys. I mean, the Seahawks threw out there over the years, even Anthony Bradford as a rookie last year, or if you look at some of the players that they've gone through, you imagine being on the other side of that and saying, oh my God, we're going to have who block Byron Murphy this week? We're going to have who block Leonard Williams at the same time, potentially. It's a huge advantage. It's a huge advantage. And so they felt like Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks felt like Leslie Frazier gave up a little bit, maybe more than he intended to, talking about where they see the greatest mismatches are at the guard position in the NFL. And then the last bit of sound I've got here is from Bucky Brooks. Bucky Brooks, by the way, I mean, both these guys, Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks, are both fantastic, but I feel like Bucky Brooks, he sees what's going on in Seattle more than I think most people nationally. And I really appreciate hearing his thoughts. This was him talking about Tariq Woolen, Julian Love, and the Mike McDonald system.
Natural thing that a coach sees when he falls up in the Pacific Northwest and sees Tariq Woolen. One, you just don't see guys with that size, that length, and that speed. Two, you go back and you see how he played his rookie year. If someone plays that well at the NFL level, he can do it again. Now we got to figure out how do we unlock that so it can be a consistent level of performance for him. And then Julian Love. We have talked about on the podcast, particularly in recent weeks, just how we are fans of smart football players, high IQ, solid instincts. Julian Love, when you talk to people about him, they talk about, man, he's the consummate pro, high IQ, a guy who has played at a high level in his role for various teams. I think the Seattle Seahawks feel really good about what Love can do. And we talked about Mike McDonald's system and how, complex for them, easy for us. We're going to make it easy for us because it's conceptual learning, but we're going to show a bunch of different looks to the defense that throws them off. And even though it's simple for us, someone in the back end has to get everyone lined up and doing it on the same page. I think what Leslie talked about with Julian Love was also part of the bigger theme that he had about the secondary. The importance of communication and trust in the back end allows the coordinator to do more things when it comes to attacking the offense.
Yeah. I mean, I think Bucky hit it on the head there with when they've talked about communication with Julian Love over and over and over again and how he's a great communicator. I think Bucky just described why that's so important, right? For them, that the coaches know that Julian Love is going to understand what they're doing, that they trust him to understand what he's seeing and what the adjustments are, and to get guys in the right spots, which gives them more freedom and more confidence to call the plays they need to. He also talked about how Mike McDonald's scheme is complex for the offense to figure out, but it's simple for the team that's the defense is playing. Now, we've heard from the defensive players in the Seahawks, they wouldn't necessarily say it's easy or simple. They're still definitely getting up to speed on it, but we have heard from various folks about the simplicity with which they are able to teach it, and the system that Mike McDonald's come up with to teach this defense effectively. And I think that's pretty cool. And he started by talking about Tariq Woolen and just that you cannot be an NFL talent evaluator or a coach and see the size, speed combination with Tariq Woolen and not think, holy crap, like this guy is special. It's just true. There just aren't guys his size that run at his speed. They just don't exist. So A lot of good stuff there from Bucky Brooks, kind of talking and reflecting about this group. I've got a lot more from Bucky Brooks and Janet Jeremiah that I'll go through in later during this week. They did a bunch of rankings of different groups, positional groups within the division, like so NFC West. I'm going to go through and kind of summarize some of their rankings. PFF has been doing similar rankings. We'll kind of compare and contrast some of those. I will react to my thoughts about some of those as well. You've heard where I put some of the rankings for the Seahawks as well. Let's talk about that. They've been putting out a lot of great content. So make sure to check them out over at NFL.com or the NFL YouTube channel. If you haven't given this show a like and click subscribe, please do. It takes a second, and I really, really appreciate it. It's something that matters for helping other people discover what we're doing here and talking. This is the only place that I'm aware of that every single day, including the weekends, you are guaranteed to get Seahawks coverage every morning. I'm going to try to do 8 a.m. Weekends, I won't do 8 a.m. most likely, but every day on the weekdays, I'm going to try to make 8 a.m. a consistent time that you can depend on getting some Seahawks content. It won't always be only Seahawks, but most of the time, the thing I will guarantee you is we will talk Seahawks every single day on this show every morning. And so when you're driving to work, when you're driving home, whatever it is, and you're looking for, man, maybe I'm not a Mariners fan. Maybe I'm not interested in the, WNBA or soccer or the Olympics or whatever it is, and you just want someone to be talking Seahawks. You're always going to get that here. And I will commit to making sure there's always Seahawks content every morning and potentially some other stuff, but I will always make sure Seahawks content gets primary positioning. That's it for today, folks. Go ahead. We've got a new YouTube member, and Peter Jacobson would love to add some more. Would appreciate folks joining as a YouTube member. If you want to get the ad-free audio with all the best equalized sound ad-free, go to patreon.com/hawkblogger. That's the place to join and get that as well. So yeah, I think we are good for this show today. Hope you enjoyed listening to Leslie Frazier. I think this guy is just a massive win for Mike McDonald and for John Schneider to have landed. And I think we're just going to feel that more and more as the season progresses. So great stuff from him. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Until next time, which will be tomorrow morning, I'm Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on YouTube and Twitter at Hawk Blogger, Instagram and Twitter at Hawk Blogger. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care.